Welcome to the Flynn Brothers Podcast. I'm John.
And I'm Jimmy. Today's big idea. There's no alternative to meat, but let's try anyway.
We talk about our journey to a more meatless lifestyle while still admitting that meat is awesome.
Later, we compare Beyond versus Impossible meat and discuss the pros and cons of other meat alternatives.
Finally, we'll compare recipes and battle it out in a meat alternative Iron Chef showdown.
It's all coming up. But first, here's the Solons.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So, America is nearly 250 years old, right? About 248, maybe. Maybe my math's a little off.
Close enough.
Let me ask you this. How long has this been a prevailing notion in the history of the United States of America? It ain't a meal if it don't got meat. Since the beginning, you think?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, as long as you could afford it. And I'd say in many parts of the country today, that is still a prevailing belief.
You know, I think about how we grew up, and we ate a lot more meat growing up than we do now. You know, growing up, we're part Italian. We'd have salami, mortadella sandwiches at lunch. Every dinner, we would have meat, usually chicken or pork or something like that. You know, weekends, breakfast, you'd have bacon. You know, there was just a lot of meat, right, as we grew up. And I remember there was a very distinct point when we were kind of like middle school, getting into high school, where Dad sort of just came home and declared he had been reading all this literature about how nitrates are just about the worst thing you could possibly eat, specifically nitrates like in lunch meat. And pretty much from then on, we didn't do lunch meat in our sandwiches.
Yeah, I mean, he read about nitrates essentially are linked to a bunch of different types of cancer. I mean,
Right.
bacon and hot dogs are about some of the worst things you can eat, all sorts of processed meat. And really, when you kind of look at processed meat, even like a slice of turkey, like you get it perfectly round, and you're just like, there's no part on the turkey that's
Yes.
perfectly round.
When you have Thanksgiving dinner, you're not getting beautiful circular slices of turkey, right? So, you know, I remember kind of from then on, our lunches where before we were having salami, mortadella sandwiches, it became cheese and crackers, or it became peanut butter and jelly. And that's something like we still kind of do today. Like, you know, we'll still have salami, we'll still have cured meats, you know, you have a hot dog, bacon once in a while, but it is something that, you know, that's probably been almost 20 years since he came home and made this declaration, but this is something that's pretty rooted in fact and hasn't really been questioned, that nitrates are bad for you, and as we'll get to later, meat at large. So I remember, like, as a family, we just started eating more, I guess you'd call it vegetarian. We were kind of doing like the Mediterranean diet.
Yeah, this coincided with our father getting into the olive oil business. We can't go into any more
Right.
specifics.
Vito Corleone-esque. Yeah.
But he would travel to Italy and Greece, and he saw the Mediterranean diet in action. You know, a lot more olive oil, fresh produce, you know, hummuses, eggplants, more fish. You use meat more as sort of a flavoring agent as
Right.
opposed to a centerpiece. And this also kind of combined with the growing farm to fork movement. We also owned a farm for a period of time as a family. So we really, I think, just grew in our appreciation of the deliciousness and versatility of fruits and vegetables.
And, you know, with this, too, like, the food pyramid has changed quite a bit, right? Like, when we grew up, it was like one of the building blocks was like dairy and grains and meats. And now that meat's now like proteins. You could do beans or tofu or alternatives. And I don't really know that dairy is on there, really. And, like, I think sugars even was on there, which, like, there's no need. Big sugar must have, you know, gotten in a little wedge on the pyramid.
It was at the top. It was at the top of the pyramid,
yeah,
like a
yeah.
little treat. Like,
like
you
a
can
little
have
cherry on top of a sundae. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
exactly. It's just, I think food and our understanding of it has changed so much.
I think just in the word protein, like you didn't used to say the word protein.
Right.
It was never devoid, like separated from meat.
Right. And, we talked about the health risks of nitrates. Meat at large, though, it's not so much kind of the cancer-causing things as nitrates, but meat at large, it's tied to like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, heart disease, everything a growing boy needs, And, well, go ahead.
The meat originally was just something that you came across every now and again as a scavenging human being out in the wild. You weren't constantly bringing down mammoths,
And, speaking of the wild, there's obviously lots of environmental risks with meat, deforestation, the greenhouse gas emissions, obviously ethical concerns. I think there's sort of this spectrum of people will allow certain animals to be killed for meats, but then we're uncomfortable with other animals being killed for meats. That's usually tied to their intelligence and, how cute they are, sort of factors like that. But I think people overall, we talked about it a bit in the horse racing episode, we're just a little more conscientious and empathetic toward animals. And it is hard, though. I mean, we talked about the prevailing notion in America that it ain't a meal if it don't got meat. And it was reminding me, we watched recently August Osage County, based on the Tracy Letts play. And there's a great scene with Chris Cooper's talking to Abigail Breslin. She's kind of the young, I guess she'd be millennial member of the family.
A Lisa Simpson type.
Yeah, so a very Lisa, very precocious and empathetic. And she's talking about how, she's vegetarian, I think, and she doesn't eat meat because animals have fear. And if you're eating meat, you're eating an animal, you're eating its fear. And then so there's this whole big scene where her kind of country family's like eating steak or whatever they're eating, and they're like, that's good fear. We're eating good fear. And it's like there is that thing if you're a meat eater where there is some cognitive dissonance related to it, right? What you're doing. If you really think about what you're doing, that, oh my goodness, like some suffering is involved. But at the same time, it's like, man, that steak's a perfect medium rare, right? There is this duality of thought.
It takes several years, I would say, for your brain to really get over it. Our mom was not exactly on board when our dad announced that we were going to be eating less meat as a family, and her refrain that she would say to everybody who came over to the house was, I just can't eat hummus 5 times a week. And it's like,
we maybe have it once a week. We weren't eating hummus constantly.
Yeah, and as you get more into eating less meat, you realize that there's a lot more different ways that you can kind of get your sustenance and nutrients without using animal products.
But even still, like far back to the days of the cavemen, there is something just primal and animalistic and just so satisfying about eating meat and just the tendons and just chewing through it, and like especially meat cooked over an open fire. Like if you have barbecue or even if you're camping and you put a hot dog over a fire, there is just that extra grilled charred flavor that too adds something, right? That other food products can't quite capture as well as meat.
It's a celebration. It's, we've killed the great beast and we've brought it back to the tribe. This is a cause for mirth since the mists of time.
But, I did my part back in college trying to get away from meat. I worked for the school newspaper. We both did, I suppose. You were my editor for
I
a
hired
while.
you.
You hired me, in fact. Yeah. The Nepo baby protesters are going to come for us. Although, does it count if it's a brother? It's more the parent and child. Is it all right if it's a brother?
We'll have to discuss that.
And nobody else wants to work there?
That was the main thing. I kind of bullied you into taking
That's
the job
right,
because
that's
I
right.
couldn't get anyone else to do it.
But one of my early articles was, I was gaining some weight there in college. The freshman 15, they called it. I went ahead and pushed it up to a 30 or 35.
You took care of the freshman 15 about the first quarter, yeah.
I added the sophomore 20. But yeah, so I thought it'd be a fun article to go vegan for a week. And it was pretty interesting. I remember I lost in just 1 week, I lost like 10 pounds. And, obviously the college diet is not the healthiest, right? And there's a lot of meat involved. And I remember like going through and I was like very lightheaded and I was eating like, I'd have like almonds and a banana for breakfast, and then maybe like a sandwich, like peanut butter sandwich or something for lunch. And then dinner, I would kind of try the like vegetarian options in the cafeteria. The worst one though was the soy chicken. I can't. They haven't figured out chicken. It's
not.
It's too tough of a. It's very rubbery. Anytime I've had like a chicken replacement, like meat alternative, it just doesn't work. But part of what I learned too is not all vegan food is healthy, right? Like Oreos are technically vegan, or potato chips, right? So you have people who are vegan who aren't necessarily healthy. But I remember I got to the end of the week and I was like, oh, finally I did it. I'm just going to pig out and just eat a bunch of animal products. And I went to The Habit, the burger place, and I got a huge huge cheeseburger, lots of American cheese, lots of beef, and then I got truffle Parmesan fries, and I finished it off with a chocolate malt. And at the end, about an hour later, I was in the fetal position on the ground and had the worst stomachache of my life and thought, there maybe is something to, when vegans and vegetarians say meat just doesn't agree with my system. It's like I took a 1-week detox and it wreaked havoc, right?
It is pretty funny that it's almost poisonous.
Yeah, right.
Meat that you have to develop this tolerance to it, and if you stop taking the poison,
right,
you
it's
aren't
like
you aren't processing
a spy has a little dose of cyanide each day, and then if a super villain ever drugs them with cyanide. But you too, you had a period of time longer than a week in college, but didn't you kind of end of college?
Well,
no,
once I graduated,
healthy, right?
I moved into an apartment that was literally just down the street from a beautiful farmer's market in Sacramento. It was underneath the freeway, so there was just a ton of space, and it was a true farmer's market. There wasn't like all of these crafts and ready-made foods and vintage shirts. It was literally farmers came with their produce, and it was some of the best produce you could buy. It was also really cheap because they came to the market on Sunday after hitting Oakland and San Francisco on Friday and Saturday. So they're like, we're trying to get rid of this vegetables, fruits today. So you could get great deals. And I started making like salads for lunch, all sorts of vegetables with little feta, beets, carrots, quinoa, arugula, radishes, green beans, apples, pears, peaches, oranges, strawberries, all types of fruit, all types of vegetables. And that was really what I was eating because it was cheap and there wasn't really a supermarket close to me, so it was the easiest way for me to get food. But I supplemented with some pasta, curries, beans, and rice. But I just found that over time I was just losing a lot of weight because I wasn't thinking about what I was putting in my body in the sort of a holistic way, I guess. You have to still compensate. If you are going to go vegetarian or vegan, you still have to get like protein and you have to get fat. And if you're just eating sort of fruits and vegetables and grains, you're not getting sort of the stuff that you need. I noticed that like I felt like my blood was thin, like my hands and feet were always cold. I would get like lightheaded. And I was just like, I have no idea what's going on with me. I feel so weird. And then one day, just like, I was walking around. I was like, there's Willie's Burgers. I'll have a burger at Willie's. Had the burger, and it was like a video game character. It was like do 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 do, like whatever.
Health, health bonus. Yeah,
and I was like, I need to eat, fat and protein and all these things. And I wasn't really, I think, as aware as much now. Or then as I am now, where you can get that stuff from other sources.
I think, if you do eat meat, if you're over the ethical concern, it is pretty essential in some quantities. And I remember when we moved in together to L.A., we were in our early 20s and, a couple of young bachelors pre-COVID days. And we were living it up with our meals. And, we were having burgers and eating a lot of meat. We kind of went back to lunch meat sandwiches for a while. But
our big thing we would do is we'd get a slat of Hawaiian rolls and then fill it with fried bologna and American cheese.
Yeah. Do some fried bologna sandwiches. That was good. Some potato chips found their way on there. Some pickles, some mustard. Oh, look at me drooling on the microphone. But yeah, I remember we went back to having lunch meat sandwiches, and after a while, we were just you brought up that thing about the turkey being perfectly circular in lunch meat, and it's just kind of gross. Like we were just sort of like, all right, we're kind of good on the lunch meat. Let's give the like tofurkey and the meat alternative a shot, and we honestly found one that was like kind of a smoked ham style tofurkey that was okay. A lot of them were unpalatable, but we had one that was pretty good. And for a couple years, I would say we wouldn't buy it all the time, but whenever we did like a sandwich, right, we would do that. And if you dressed it up with like condiments and pickles and lettuce and stuff, it was pretty good.
Need a lot of mayo.
Yes, yeah, you need a lot of mayo. But we wanted to eat healthier. We wanted to kind of help the planet. And as we've evolved since then, we've gotten more into Impossible Meat, Beyond Meat, tofu, soy riso, that sort of stuff. And, I think, like you said, with the mayo on the fake lunch meat sandwiches, when you use these meat alternatives, it's like, ooh, I'm going to add a little extra cheese. Or, right, you kind of add some, like, other fattening, maybe less healthy things to kind of fill in the gaps of the fact that it's not really meat.
Yeah, you take the credit of guilt that you've lost from eating something bad, and you're like, well, now that I've got this credit, let's slather it up.
Right. But yeah, and then to your point about the Mediterranean diet, where you kind of use meat as flavoring. So we would make like, oh, lentil soup or like a pot of beans, and you throw in like a ham hock or something, right? So it's like I'm not eating a ton of meat, and granted there are nitrates in that, but you're doing it in such small quantities that it's generally pretty healthy. But I think for the most part we eat pretty meatless and pescatarian during the week. On weekends, if we're going out, if we're ever traveling, we cut loose a bit. There's that Anthony Bourdain quote. I forget it exactly, but in terms of like vegetarians and stuff, if you're traveling abroad, he always on the firm ground that it's polite to, if you can, take a break from being vegetarian and vegan. If your hosts are offering you certain things or only certain meats are available, you go with that, and you don't burden your hosts with too many dietary restrictions if you can help it.
Don't love when you take ethical stands that make them feel bad about themselves,
right,
in general. Yeah.
Right. It's like, hey, you want to have a beer? And it's like, oh, no, I'm good. And then it's like, oh, well, I'm just drinking a beer alone with a guy who doesn't want a beer. Come on. But, I jotted down a couple other Bourdain quotes that, I think we talked about in our Bourdain versus Vietti episode that kind of applies to this whole meatless thing. One is, your body is not a temple, it's an amusement park. Enjoy the ride. That is very much the pro-meat, set aside the ethical concerns and enjoy the fact that it's part of being human.
Very much a top of the food chain. I'm not.
Yes. We clawed our way to the top of the food chain, and we are going to enjoy it a bit. And then his other one, quote, to me, life without veal stock, pork fat, sausage, organ meat, demi-glace, or even stinky cheese is a life not worth living. Very much in the same vein. We're at the top of the food chain. We're Epicureans. We've, through history, developed all these great ways of honoring the animal, if you want to look at it that way, and celebrating the animal. And I think that's something I and you as well very much subscribe to.
100%. I also think by going meatless for certain days of the week and then having it more as a celebratory thing as opposed to a standard item that comes with every meal that I have, I do appreciate it more when I get it, and it becomes more of an important sort of thing. And you also, I think, save up your meat budget, if you will, for higher quality meat as opposed to, turkey meat in your lunch every day.
Yeah.
I also, just to really get down to it, I think these are some pretty crazy statistics. 14.5% of global greenhouse emissions, or 6.19 billion tons of carbon dioxide, are the result of meat production, which I always think it's crazy when I see these, when they talk about billions of tons of carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide doesn't weigh anything.
Doesn't weigh nothing.
How do you get 6.19 billion tons of it?
No, it's insane. It's insane. Yeah, unfathomable, really.
I can't even really wrap my head around it. And then this is another one that is pretty hard to wrap your head around. The UN estimates in 2022, 80 billion land animals were slaughtered, which sounds awful, but then you think 74 billion were chickens.
Oh, hey, well, we're all good.
And,
yeah. What are we going to do? Not eat chicken sandwiches?
Come on. I will say this. Of all the animals, chickens I probably have the least amount of sympathy for.
Sure, yeah.
I've seen lots of cute videos of baby cows and baby pigs online that really make me, sort of battle with it. I've never seen that charming of a chicken.
No, and it's quite brutal because they descend from dinosaurs, the former rulers, god kings of the planet. And then now they're 90% of all animals that are slaughtered are their ancestors. It's kind of cruel, right? But, we think, you mentioned these statistics. We talk about the ethical concerns with meat. We do think that eating meat alternatives, although it's a small solution, it is somewhat of a solution to this overconsumption of meat. And we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we will discuss some of our favorite meat alternatives. All right, meat alternatives. Let's talk about the two big dogs, the Coke and Pepsi of meat alternatives. We have Beyond Meat and Impossible Meat, and we'll start with Beyond Meat. How would you describe the flavor of Beyond Meat to the uninitiated?
It does what its name suggests. It is trying to go beyond meat. Right. It has this sort of nutty, smoky, charcoaly, undeniably artificial flavor. You can't really compare it 1-to-1 to anything you've ever eaten before.
Frankly, it reminds me of when we were young. They might still have them, Boca burgers, that sort of smoky, charcoaly flavor you're talking about. I remember those had them. I think they were maybe made of different things. Beyond Meat is mostly like pea protein, right? Isn't that kind of the main ingredient?
Yeah, there's a few other types of protein: rice protein, mung bean protein, and then a bunch of oils and starches.
And that's the oils is kind of where Beyond Meat is criticized for, and Impossible as well, is they have kind of high saturated fats, and a lot of that comes from like coconut oil, canola oil, stuff like that.
Yeah, neither of these are healthier necessarily than meat. Maybe a little bit healthier, but you're kind of splitting hairs. They're pretty equivalent health-wise.
Yeah, people like us who eat it, you're mostly doing it for environmental reasons and ethical reasons, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think it's just every now and again mixing it in will help you feel a little bit better about yourself. Also, I don't typically buy ground beef to make myself a burger, whereas buying one of these, I find I'll make a burger out of it more. And it's like, well, you feel a little less bad about it.
And then Beyond Meat, it's funny how they want to replicate all the parts about meat, like the bleeding of meat, right? So I think they add I think it's beet juice, right? They add beet juice to kind of give it that bleeding effect that happens when you cook a burger.
The oils have coagulated, so it sort of looks like how fat is in ground meat.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Beyond Meat, it definitely, when you first taste it, like if you're someone who's never really had a meat alternative and you have your first bite, you probably won't like it. I would suggest take a few more bites, though, because it is something that I think gets better as you keep eating it. But I know some restaurants have, like fast food restaurants, right, have sort of tried to incorporate it into their menus. Isn't that right?
Yeah, Dunkin' Donuts has it in some like breakfast stuff. Taco Bell has tried it out. And then the most interesting one, which I think this company is going to need to embrace one of these for them to really take off, but McDonald's tried the McPlant. They tested it out, but it was phased out due to really poor sales, which I honestly have to imagine is the result of the terrible name. The McPlant is a terrible name.
It's fun. I get the approach, though, because McDonald's burgers already are pretty beyond meat in terms of they don't really resemble meat, right? They're very thin. They don't really, unless you get like a quarter pounder or something, they really don't resemble meat. But yeah, shame it didn't work out. And I would almost attribute 100% of that to the name, as you mentioned.
Plant is just not something I really want to eat. The McBeyond, I'm trying to think of another way that you could describe it, that you could market it. But
and if you have an idea for how McDonald's should have marketed it, please send an email to flynnbrospod@gmail.com. Well, let's talk about Impossible Meat. Is Impossible the Coke or the Pepsi, you think? Probably, I would say the Coke
I'd
is
say
Impossible.
It's the Coke. I think it's a little bit more popular.
And they changed their branding, too. They had the green packaging, which, again, gets the brain to think plants, but they've changed it to red now. It's like carnivores, come on over.
I think that's really who they're targeting, because I've talked to people who are vegan and vegetarian, and they think particularly the Impossible Meat, which really tries to look like meat, it's much more red, whereas Beyond is more sort of brown. They think it's too close to meat for them. I think Impossible is trying to seduce meat eaters to mix this in every now and again, kind of like people like us. And their sort of interesting technologies is they contain heme, which I don't know if I'm saying that right, Heme. It is the molecule that makes blood red and carries oxygen through the body of animals, but it doesn't necessarily come exclusively from animals. They get theirs from soy plant roots.
Okay,
so it's this very interesting way of going about it. And as opposed to Beyond Burger, which if you have a soy allergy, you can eat that, but Impossible Burger is mostly soy.
I see. Oh, interesting. Well, I would say it's our preference between the two. We prefer Impossible Meat due to its closeness to meat, due to the lack of that kind of artificial smoky flavor that Beyond Meat will have.
It does lack flavor.
It does.
Sure.
You need to season it pretty aggressively. I would say it works well anywhere you would use ground beef. It works pretty well, like if you do kind of ground up and chopped up with like taco seasoning, or a burger is really good. Again, if you put a lot of condiments on it, it's pretty versatile though. And then a couple other fast food places use Impossible Meat, right?
Yeah, Burger King, Little Caesars, as well as David Chang's, Momo Momofuku Nishi. He makes a burger there. And I think that also, you don't really see too much of an embrace of these things by top high-level chefs, just because they're just not the best foods to work with flavor-wise.
No, they're like lower end ingredients. And I think if you're a top chef with a good restaurant, you're going to try to refine great animal products. You're not going to try to do like trick people into eating impossible meat. It also just, I think if you were a big time chef with a big time restaurant, it would feel a little gimmicky. It's like, oh, we're doing an impossible meat entree. It's like, what is this, a paid sponsorship, right? It would just feel odd.
Yeah, and it's never going to be better than sort of the meat version. And I think the other thing too with these alternatives is they don't impart this tasty flavor to the rest of the dish the way that meat does.
Right.
You're not really loving the way that Impossible Beyond leaches into the rest of your food.
Fat equals flavor, as they say. But yeah, so to kind of evaluate the two, I would say both are probably best as burgers. I think, that's kind of their marketed intent, and that's probably their best use as well. And again, covering it with the fixings, your lettuce, your tomato, your condiments. As we said, Impossible is more versatile because it's a little less flavor forward, and you can kind of cover it up with seasoning. But although Beyond is interesting, like the smoky charcoaly artificial flavor isn't the best, but it is oddly craveable. Like I said, like the more you eat of it, you kind of are like, all right, I'm kind of getting into this, right?
I'd say Beyond has the higher ceiling. Like I'm more intrigued by like 4 or 5 or 6.0 version of Beyond Burger, because I would be interested to see what new thing they can come up with.
They're still developing, right? And one really good Beyond product is they make these like Beyond sausages, which are pretty good. I actually think those are good. And like sausage meat, ground beef, like these aren't high quality meats. Like you're using scraps of multiple different animals. So it's like if that kind of wigs you out and the hyper processed nature that kind of wigs you out, these meat alternatives are a good substitute. Like the Beyond sausages, I feel way cooler about eating those than like pork sausage is great, but it's like when you eat a pork sausage, it's like I know like maybe some of this meat fell on the factory floor, or just like this
gristly.
This is from 5 different animals. They're like, oh, I got like a little knuckle bone in that one, right? It's not awesome. But Beyond, it's a little more selfish of a meat. I don't think it plays very well with others, like in pasta dishes. Impossible Meat's a little more versatile. And, I will say this too. If you overcook Beyond Meat, it turns into a extraterrestrial substance. I mean, it is pretty gross.
Although you do want to get a hard sear on these. So that's the other thing is they're sort of finicky. You're not supposed to let them cook in too much water either.
Right.
There's all sorts of things where you sort of have to be careful with them.
You need to have a few moves in the kitchen, I would say, to kind of work with these, right?
And you sort of just maybe just want to kind of cook them on their own and then assemble it with the rest of the thing.
Yes,
Again, it's not like ground beef or any of these other ones.
You're not making a bolognese with either of these.
And I think what was interesting, though, about them is when they first debuted, people thought, oh, this is going to be huge. This is a gigantic market for us to capitalize on. And I dug into some of the finances of it.
Yeah.
And Beyond Meat had one of the biggest IPOs ever, initial public offerings for us less financially savvy. You know me and Jim. This is stock talk.
Yeah, stock talk.
As people like to call the Flynn Brothers podcast. It was valued at $3.8 billion.
Wow.
Peaks at $9.44 billion. So
Jeez,
one
that's
of
crazy.
the biggest companies at
Didn't
the time.
it had like a ton of celebrity endorsements too, right? Didn't
Indeed.
it, like DiCaprio or who was it? It was
Jessica Chastain, Snoop Dogg,
Okay.
Chris Paul, who went vegan and extended his career, so
Right.
something to be said for that.
Right.
Kyrie Irving, who is either vegan or vegetarian, or certainly interested in meatless options, and but the problem was that it got killed by COVID. For whatever reason, you would think that being in your house, you would be more willing to experiment with these alternative
Right.
meats, but that simply was not the case. I think probably people valued comfort, things of familiarity.
During COVID, like sales of Frito-Lays went sky high. I think people initially were somewhat healthy, but then by the end of it, like the average person had gained like 20 pounds.
Yeah,
or
you're like,
whatever.
oh, we're going to be here for a year? Well, I can lose some weight. Why don't I put some on? And
Sure,
wow,
sure,
before
sure,
that.
sure.
And yeah, in the last 5 years, the stock has fallen fallen over 95%.
Jeez,
Which is pretty astonishing. It's so bad that Impossible Burger is not a public company as a result of this. So you can't buy Impossible
So
Burger
the Flynn
stock.
Bros say buy.
Yeah.
Stock talk. That's the end of
That's
stock
talk.
Actually, no, we got more stock
couple
talk.
of
Oh, we got
things.
more
You know,
stock
it
talk.
did raise a bunch of money. Google and Bill Gates are both invested in
Is
it.
this Beyond Meat?
Impossible.
Oh, now we're moving to Impossible.
We've moved to
from Beyond
Impossible.
Meat.
Yes,
Okay.
they're a privately owned company. So Google and Bill Gates own it, but it's not something you have to be, I suppose, requested to buy in, or you have to say, "Hey, Impossible, take my money, give me some of the
Gotcha.
company," as opposed
Right.
to any Joe Schmo out on Wall Street, Robin Hood can buy it.
So neither are particularly booming on
No.
Wall Street.
I think they've sort of settled into their status as like a slightly more desirable tofu, I guess. Like I think
Okay.
it's got a little bit more zhuzh to it,
Sure.
than tofu or these other sort of meatless options that we'll discuss. But they're not the next big thing.
Well,
or
then-
they
then-
aren't yet.
Well, then what needs to change? What do you think makes Beyond Meat, Impossible Meat go to the next level? What makes them both catch on?
Several different things. They have to be somehow cheaper than meat, which it
Yeah,
blows my mind that
yeah.
you have, like, if you have to slaughter a cow or a pig, break it all down after raising it its entire life, feeding it grain and all of this, and somehow that is cheaper than this thing that's just made out of plant products.
Pea protein,
Like,
or
to me,
soy, yeah.
that blows my mind.
So it's got to be cheaper. I think, you talk about, we're in Los Angeles pricing zone, but typical pound of ground beef is anywhere from low end $2.99 to higher end $5.99, I would say.
Yeah, and Impossible and Beyond are typically running you up like $9.99 unless it's on sale.
Unless it's on sale, it's usually like $5.99, which again is like high end ground beef, to like $9.99. So it's like when we buy it, we tend to try to get it on sale, but even still, it's like we know we're paying more for ground beef. The environmental and ethical concerns are such that we think in our small way we are doing something.
I think most Americans usually are not willing to spend extra money to feel a little bit better ethically about something.
I think too, the quality is going to keep changing, keep getting better. I think, there's only so much you can do with the marketing. There's only so many times you can go from a green package to a red package, right? Yeah. So I think the taste eventually has to change. I'm really fascinated by, they talk about like the lab grown meat. I wonder if that's going to end up being the happy medium where that has less of an environmental impact, but it's still meat. I wonder if that's eventually where this is all going to lead to.
Yeah, I have some stuff about this later, but let's get into it right now. So this is something that 2/3 of Americans are interested in eating, lab-grown meat, and 3 states have already banned it.
Wow.
Which is kind of interesting because it really isn't available, but it's these sort of red state, I don't want my meat coming from a petri dish, is basically the slogan.
Is it that?
gets
Is there
it
a
banned.
morality component to it all?
No,
Or not really.
Not really. I
Okay.
mean, maybe it's stem cells that are taken from an
Right,
animal, but it's
right.
basically cells taken from an animal. And I borrowed this from a New York Times article. They are coaxed with a cocktail of nutrients into becoming muscle and connective tissue / fat. So it's
Interesting.
basically like a
Okay.
ground version of meat. They're made in these bioreactors. And I think another way to think about it is if you're banning it, you're saying, like, I stand with America's ranchers, as opposed to
I
those
see.
scientists
I
making
see.
meat in a petri dish, which has this very sort of sci-fi Bong Joon-ho feel to it, where it's like,
right.
I don't want to eat that crap. But I would be interested in eating it, and I do think that it does stand a chance to become something that catches on, particularly in like the ground meat, and if they were able to get it cheaper. But I really just think as long as maybe they need to get subsidies. I'm sure that cows and such are and agriculture is subsidized heavily by the government, and maybe that's something that needs to happen. Certainly isn't going to happen in the next 4 years, but I think that this is going to be a area that could see some growth. But at the moment, I'd say we've plateaued a bit, if not kind of gone on a downward point.
More meat alternatives after the break. All right, more meat alternatives. We're going to start with tofu. Now, I would like to indulge the audience, if you could indulge the audience, in what is now becoming a running segment. We are going to call this John's Brief History. Okay, so we did the history of the horse. I forget what other history we did. What was the other one?
I'm giving so many historical lessons. It's really hard to keep track.
Anyway, this is a running segment called John's Brief. Oh, you did a history of teeth or dental
History of
hygiene.
dental
something like that.
hygiene products.
There it is. All right. So third time's the charm. We have named this segment John's Brief History. It'll keep showing up in these podcasts whether you like it or not. But we're going to start with this on tofu. John, go ahead, give us your brief history of tofu.
It has been consumed for over 2,000 years in China. Its origins are unknown. There are many theories surrounding it. Some believe some royalty created it. But I think the most believable theory is that they copied Mongolians who made cheese. The way you make cheese is you coagulate milk into curds, and that's how you make tofu. You coagulate soy milk, and then you press the curds into solid blocks, and the more you press and the more water that you squeeze out of them, the firmer your tofu becomes.
That's going to convert carnivores. Yeah, great. No, that's great. Yeah, I think it does make sense when you think about because it basically is like a soft cheese, right? In its
Exactly.
texture, yeah.
And I do think that tofu of all of them is the most inviting of the meat alternatives because it's such a blank canvas.
Yes.
I think something that people who are adverse to not eating meat or these meat alternative products, you're like, well, let me just try it on its own or with a little bit of,
Sure,
whatever. And I
yeah.
think tofu is one of those things where it's like, oh, this is fine. Especially if you you can really get a nice hard sear on tofu.
If you pan fry it.
Fry it.
I think it, to your point, it is a blank canvas. I think that's also what turns people off is that just most people say doesn't have any flavor. And I think it's very pillowy. It's a little marshmallowy. It is pretty much void of flavor. Asian cultures are the best. Obviously, they invented it of using it in dishes. I think in the Western world, we're not great. Like pretty much at a restaurant, the only time I've ever had good tofu is at like an Indian restaurant or a Japanese restaurant, or I think in the West we're not very great. But it's environmentally very friendly, right?
Yeah. Oh, if everybody switched over to tofu, we'd be doing a lot better in terms of meeting those climate change goals that the UN laid out. And I think too, it's like the best way to think about tofu is you got to really cover it with as many spices and sauces and all of these other different things. Whatever you like to eat flavor-wise, put that on tofu and put it in large quantities because it can take it.
Well, one meat alternative I think is arguably superior or at least on par with its meat counterpart is soy riso, the meat alternative version of chorizo. Chorizo is great. However, it's incredibly fatty. It can really upset your stomach a lot of the time I found with chorizo, right? It's like not the best quality pork, right? But when you have soy riso, there is, like Beyond Meat, there's kind of a slight off flavor, but there's so much seasoning in it, like chorizo, that it works really well. And like a lot of these meat alternatives, if you sear it really hard, you don't overcook it, it turns out really good. Like if we'll make like breakfast tacos or breakfast burritos and we'll use like soy riso and eggs, and it really works well.
It's a staple in the house, and I'd say it's the gateway meat alternative.
Yes, I would say if you had to give someone who is hesitant one of these, this would be the best way to do it. Yeah, definitely like a taco or even like on top of nachos or something. But yeah, no, it's wonderful. Tempeh is one I haven't had a ton of. It's sort of like tofu, is that right? Tempeh, it's like kind of fermented.
So yes, the quality varies. It can be good, it can be bad. It depends on where you get it. It depends on how it's prepared. However, this is something that I think is more adverse if you didn't love the way that tofu is made. It's made from pressed soybeans that have been fermented, and they're bound by sort of this root-like fungus, which I know doesn't sound great. Usually it can be good, but I do think it's something that's going to be hard for Americans to kind of get around their heads around. It's like, I'm going to eat beans wrapped in fungus. I'm not so sure I like that.
I don't even like regular beans.
But it's big in Indonesia.
Yeah. Another meat alternative is seitan. That is, I think you wrote down here, it says it's the Chinese translation of the word wheat meat. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what it means in
it's
Chinese.
wheat meat. And I think it's often used like in sort of fried chicken substitutes. You'll do like fried seitan, and it has kind of that. It's as close to chicken as a lot of these substitutes have got. But how do they make it again? It's
You rinse wheat flour dough over and over again to remove the starch from it, and so you
okay.
get just the gluten protein. It's sort of like a loaf, and then it has this sort of firm, crumbly texture. So it's a little bit more similar to meat, but again, not one that I think has really caught on in a big way in America.
Another meat alternative, jackfruit. This one is usually used in pulled pork substitutes. It is kind of a shreddable, starchy fruit that they will try to spice like Carolina-style pulled pork, a lot of vinegar, a lot of seasoning. And I've had it before, and it's not for me, man. Like, I frankly, I think it's a little gross. Like, I don't love jackfruit.
Yeah, it kind of has a feeling to me a little bit where people talk about mushrooms as being meaty.
Yes,
It's like,
yes.
I'm just not quite buying it.
It ain't exactly a ribeye. Yeah, when people say that, ribeye, that's meaty in my opinion. But it's also pretty expensive, right? Not a lot of grocery stores will carry it, and it can be a little on the
Yeah,
pricier
more of
side.
like a tropical fruit, so you're gonna have to import it, and there's not so much demand, so it's kind of odd that there's low demand, but the prices. Again, this is stock talk.
This is stock
We don't
talk.
want to bore you guys with all this money.
Another meat alternative, which I guess is still kind of a meat, fish. We talk about how we'll do a lot of meatless pescatarian diet during the week. We have been eating more fish, and there's obviously environmental concerns with fish as well, with overfishing, with plastic pollution, with mercury. They warn you not to eat too much fish; you'll get mercury poisoning.
Yeah, I mean, the plastic pollution, I think, is a double-edged sword because a lot of that Pacific garbage patch is the result of fishing equipment that's just been
Right.
cast off in the ocean.
Right.
And also, since the ocean has so much microplastics, fish eat the microplastics.
We eat
and
the fish, microplastics, all coursing through our veins. But it can be very expensive too, especially if you get the stuff that hopefully doesn't have the mercury, doesn't have the pollutions in it. There's the plastics, the microplastics. But there is this pretty well-known Monterey Bay Aquarium seafood watch guide that we'll sometimes look at online. And it's a little more specific to the Pacific Ocean and if you're kind of along like the western coast, but it applies worldwide. And they have kind of this scale from red to yellow to green, and you can guess obviously that those fishes that are in the red category are not great. The ones in the green category are good. Yellow is kind of hit or miss, but red it's funny kind of looking through it is they have a lot of ones that are on there that are pretty no duh, like shark is on there. It's like, yeah, okay, probably shouldn't be hunting sharks, right? And then octopus is on there as well. But some other ones you see a lot in restaurants like branzino and Chilean sea bass. Chilean sea bass, of course, the fanciful rebranding of the fish, the Patagonian toothfish. And you see why they renamed it Chilean sea bass, a little sexier on a menu. But those two I thought were very odd, branzino and Chilean sea bass, because you associate those with fine dining.
Yeah, that isn't really the funny thing about it is like it doesn't matter how expensive it is
Right.
or something like that. It's more like the way that they get it. And I think that the Monterey Bay Aquarium, they really know what sort of practices we can do on a long-term basis. And it really is sort of like something I think that, to harken back to an early episode with Moby Dick, we really shouldn't overfish or do too much to the ocean because it is
Right.
really just this ever-replenishing source of good food if we take care of it. So.
And, the Seafood Watch Guide encourages buying farmed seafood as well. So like farmed versus wild clams or farmed versus wild scallops, which I think too people are just from stuff they've read online are suspicious of like, oh, farmed, how can that possibly be good? But it is, if you're trying to prevent pollution, it can be a little more sustainable.
There are some that are good, and then there are some farms in countries like China or other places where they don't follow some of the best practices, and there's some concerns that they might be, brewing the next super bug in these fishy tanks.
But the one through line is if you're getting fish from Alaska, that's usually a good sign. There's usually good fish up there. But
it's hard for us to get up there.
It's hard, yeah.
The fish, it's easy.
Fish, it's easy. Us, we got to book a cruise. But to kind of put a bow on this, I think the best meat alternatives are used in instances where the quality of meat doesn't matter so much. So ground meat, sausage, chorizo, these are not the highest quality forms of meat. So if you can stomach using meat alternatives instead of meat in those instances, I think that is a great first step in terms of joining a more meatless lifestyle.
I would also recommend when you go out to eat, particularly like Indian or Thai restaurants, trying that option in
Yes.
curries or noodle dishes where there's already a lot of stuff going on that you'll like.
Right.
And you'll get to kind of see the meat alternative, tofu in this instance, prepared by experts, essentially.
yes.
I think you can easily turn yourself off on some of these if you blow it at home and you just don't really know what you're doing. Like,
Right.
entrust it to somebody who makes it literally every day.
Yeah, I think you should view meat as a privilege, not a right. That's sort of it too, right? You don't necessarily need to eat it every day. You certainly don't need to eat it at every meal. So even just starting, like whether it's one day a week eating meatless, or just, you know what, like I'm not going to do meatless dinner a couple nights a week. Like doing kind of, that was sort of how we started, where it was just like, all right, we're going to do, Fridays during Lent, right? You have fish, or you have something meatless, right? Or, if you're not religious, you just kind of have to put those own days on you.
And as you develop habits and try some of these alternatives, you'll find that you'll like them. And I also think you'll find that you don't crave meat as much. And even you'll crave some nights like, I'd like to take a break from meat actually tonight.
Yes.
Like I'd actually
Yes.
like to have tofu tonight, or
Right.
I'd like to have just beans and rice or something like that.
And we've gotten to that place.
Yeah, and I think you feel healthier. There's definitely been some days, too, where when I first started making an effort, I was like, oh, yes, I really worked hard today, and I made sure that I didn't eat any meat. And then now, a couple years into it, I would say there's times where I've realized, oh, it's been like 3 days since I had meat without even really thinking about it.
One just kind of footnote, we had talked about how people are nervous around meat because of how processed it is. Fair point. That meat alternatives also are pretty hyper processed, like Beyond Meat, Impossible Meat, so these go through a lot of processing as well. So that's something to mention as well.
Perhaps a less gross
Yes.
process, though.
Yes, I would say so. But, to be perfectly honest, some meats and animal products just, there is no alternative to them. Bacon is a great example. We talked about chicken. They just haven't quite figured that out. Carnitas, right? Foie gras, not that you should really be eating that all the time. But the list goes on, right? There are a few things where it's the Anthony Bourdain quote. It's like a life without, etc., is not worth living, right?
Yeah.
That is like, there are some things that we as humans have developed that are worth holding on to.
And if there is no alternative to them, it kind of just makes them all that more special. And
Yeah.
you're just like, wow, this is really excellent.
And, although we encourage a meatless lifestyle in some instances, we do feel in other instances that meat is pretty essential to being human. And, we should, yes, scale back our consumption of meat, view it more as special occasion eating. But I really don't think it's realistic to assume humans are ever going to give it up completely.
No, I just don't think it'll really happen. Although I will say, I think maybe part of this too is like, I would say you and I both agree with the vegetarian/vegan outlook in terms of the ethical, moral, environmental qualms with it. I think we should just say you're all correct.
Yes.
You
for
guys
sure.
are right.
For sure.
It's
for sure.
just, I think that's part of just being alive and being human, that there is a little bit of blood in your life.
Yeah. But, we understand for people who are resistant to going to a more meatless lifestyle, we understand that change is hard. So when we come back, we're going to play a little game where we're going to go head to head, share some meat alternative recipes, and we're going to have ourselves a meat alternative Iron Chef showdown when we come back. Game time. We're doing a meat alternative Iron Chef showdown. For those who have not seen Iron Chef, it's a food competition show started in Japan. They brought it over, Iron Chef America. But essentially, it's two chefs. They're giving a secret ingredient that must be the star of a 5-course meal. In our instance, we're just going to give one recipe for each secret ingredient. And we've written the secret ingredients down on slips of paper, and we've placed them into a hat. They will be drawn by random. Is that how you say it? Drawn by random?
At
At
random?
random. I mixed up the preposition. And thank you, Will. And Will, speaking of which, is going to be the one drawing them at random. He will pick a meat alternative, and we will each say a recipe that we would choose to battle it out. And we did our top 4 meat alternatives. I won't spoil them, but the audience will get to know them as they're drawn from the hat.
And we're sort of trying to pitch them to Will, who is the chairman.
Yes.
In this instance, a ceremonial role, an Iron Chef, who all of the meals are made for the chairman. We won't be making them for them, but we will be presenting them to Will.
And so,
as
Will,
as
when
chairman.
we present them, you'll decide which one you like better. We'll keep score, and hopefully at the end there'll be a winner. There is 4, so there's chance of a tie, but we'll see. Is everyone good? Will's good. John's good. We're all good.
I'm good.
All right, beautiful. All right, Chairman, if you'd like, you may please pick the first slip at random, and we'll be racking our brains for cookbook recipes. All right, the first one has been drawn.
pulled by the
It's been
chairman.
drawn. What do we got? Impossible meat.
meat.
Okay, impossible meat. Can I go first? I got one right off the top.
Go for it.
One of my favorite things to make with impossible meat is meatballs. I love making meatballs with regular meat, but I love impossible meatballs. Really easy, standard meatball procedure. You got your meat, in this case, impossible meat. You add egg. At 1 egg for every pound of meat. That's the good meatball technique.
That's the ratio.
That's the ratio. Some breadcrumbs. I like some very finely diced onions and garlic. Some people saute them ahead of time. I go in there raw, and then when they cook in the pan, they'll cook a little bit and keep that nice punchy flavor. You know, you can season it how you want. If you go Italian, you do some basil and parsley in there. If you're going Greek, you can do a little, mint, little parsley. And I like to sear them in a pan, and you can eat them as is. You can do, you can put them into a tomato sauce. You can do, I've done like kind of a buffalo sauce or like a sweet barbecue glaze on them. I think, knowing Will, knowing the type of chairman he is, I think I'd go Italian, old school. I'd do my Italian style impossible meatballs in a beautiful tomato sauce, almost like a gravy, like Nana's gravy. How's that sound?
Very nice.
He likes it. All right.
As soon as he raises up on the secret ingredient, the fog coming out, I'm dashing into the pantry. I'm grabbing potatoes. I'm grabbing some cauliflower.
Okay.
I'm getting some cheese. I'm getting some mayo, some ketchup, some chopped pickles, some mustard.
What the hell are you making?
And I'm chopping up the potatoes. I'm chopping them up into nice strips. I'm putting them, bam, they're going into the fryer or the oven if you're trying to be a
Okay.
bit healthier. I'm getting that cauliflower. I'm chopping that up good too. Bam, in the fryer or the roaster. And I'm making animal fries with my impossible meat. I'm going to be cutting up the meat nice and fine. You want to get some onions. You want to get some garlic in there with it. To give it a little bit
Caramelized
extra
onions, or what are
flavor.
you doing? Just sauteing them with
I would
it?
say no. You're getting the onions in first.
Okay.
You're getting them nice and cooked, sweated down. Perhaps a little bit of brownness on them, and then the garlic comes in later. You got to put the garlic in towards the time when you are adding the impossible meat. Otherwise, the garlic will burn. You do not want burned garlic. You get that up minced, nice and fine. You're sprinkling that over the top. Not yet, actually. You've pulled out all of your. Let me back up here. You've pulled out all of your cauliflower and potatoes. Bam, they're on a sheet pan. Sprinkle that with a whole bunch of cheese. Sprinkle on top of that the impossible meat, and that boom, you throw it in the oven. You let it get nice and melty. Maybe a little more cheese on top of the meat, and then you top it with your pickles. It's sort of the same way that In-N-Out makes the animal fries. These are the animal fries.
So you
that I
with
present.
your ketchup, mayo, pickles, you'd make kind of like a fry sauce, a Thousand Island
for
type.
dipping,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
exactly.
drizzling on top. Okay,
Drizzling.
very good, very good. Well, Will, what is it? The Italian impossible meatballs or the nice impossible animal fries? What do you think? With some cauliflower, that's a nice touch. Yeah, he's weighing it intensely. He's off mic here, so I got a comment for him. Yeah, I'll narrate your thoughts. Chairman, we implore you. All right. Oh, John, point for John. The animal
Yeah.
fries. Very good. Very
Animal
good.
fries win.
All right, spare me having to sit in this for too long, and go ahead and pick the next meat alternative, if you would be so kind, Chairman. He's
A lot
ready.
of fanfare. He's got his fingers waggling, digging now in the hat. He's pulled out the secret ingredient,
Here
the
we
next
go.
secret ingredient.
Tofu. Okay, John, I'll let you go first for this one. You're a big tofu guy. What are you making with
Indeed,
the tofu?
I am making a tofu pad thai. I am taking this this tofu. I am putting it in between 2 plates, and I am putting a heavy can, perhaps containing tomatoes, on top of those 2 plates, and I am draining the tofu. It's very
Okay.
important to drain the tofu for at least 30 minutes. You will be stunned at how much water comes out of it. And then I am slicing the tofu into strips, and I am laying those strips into a hot pan. I am covering those with various seasonings, maybe some ginger, salt, pepper, obviously. A little bit of MSG. That's a controversial ingredient.
yeah.
Don't be fooled by the propaganda. MSG is one of the easiest things you can use today to make your
Yes.
food taste better. Go
I
to
agree.
an
I
Asian
agree.
market, it's dirt cheap. So I'm putting some of that stuff on there. I'm putting, a little bit. I like paprika on there. I like some cayenne pepper, perhaps. And I'm really getting that seared hard. Pulling that out, you can even slice it into these nice strips once you've done that. And then, of course, if this is I'm going to make this into a pad thai. So I've got my noodles. I've got all of my various vegetables. Onion, garlic, carrot, cabbage, perhaps.
You're sautéing
peppers.
all
I'm
these?
sautéing
Yeah,
all
okay.
that. I'm getting the rice noodles done. Bam, they're out. I've drained them. I'm running under a little cold water. Boom, back in the pan. Sauces. I'm saucing it up. I'm throwing everything mixed together. Toss it, and I plate it for the chairman.
Beautiful.
Seared tofu pad thai.
Wow, that's great. That sounds like a wonderful second place dish to the winner. We've all heard of saag paneer, right? Will, you like Indian food. Saag paneer, of course, the beautiful cubes of paneer cheese cooked in saag, the wilted down, beautiful spinach that's in Indian cuisine. However, I'm not going to do paneer. I'm going to do the secret ingredient tofu. So similar to John, I will be cutting my tofu, not into strips, but into nice, beautiful cubes, just like paneer, and I will sear those hard. And since it's Indian, I'll do a little curry seasoning, stuff like that. And I'll get those seared nice and hard. Meanwhile, I'm going to do my saag. Now, they tend to do spinach with saag in Indian cuisine. I find mixing up the greens is nice. So you can chop up some spinach. You can chop up some arugula, some kale if you want, right? You want a little diversity in the greens. So you're cooking that with, you start with some diced ginger, you diced onion, you get some garlic in there, you get your beautiful Indian spices going, garam masala, curry, whatever you'd like. And then you're cooking that down. You get the greens in, and you add a little chicken stock or something, some liquid to kind of start wilting it down. And then you just want that to go low and slow. And as it's going low and slow, you add some beautiful mounds of butter. You add some beautiful cream. If you kind of want to take a little fun little route on it, you the little dash of coconut milk just to kind of give it almost a coconut curry sort of flavor. Then you go in with the seared tofu, and you let that all marry low and slow, come together. And then you do it over some beautiful rice, or you seem like a garlic naan guy, Will. I'm going to give you a little garlic naan with it. And it's the easiest Indian takeout that you can make at home. Insanely cheap, insanely healthy. Eats very rich, but like I said, is very healthy. What do you think, pal? Saag paneer every time. I called it.
It's tofu paneer. You can't call it saag paneer.
It's tofu, saag tofu. Saag tofu.
Yeah,
Right, you
why
like
not?
that. He likes that. All right, very good. All right, well, we're
good,
tied. We're tied up here. John got impossible. I got tofu. We got 2 left. The chairman is drawing one of the final 2. He will tell us now. Beyond Meat.
Beyond.
Okay, I will go first on Beyond Meat if that's all good with you,
I will
dear
defer.
competitor. Now, when the secret ingredient comes up in Iron Chef, there's often different variants of it, right? So say the secret ingredient is carrots. There'll be orange carrots, purple carrots, right? Carrot top, stuff like that. So as it's ascending, the secret ingredient, and the fake fog is circling around, the lights are flashing, there is that charcoaly Beyond Meat. And I'm looking at it, and I'll get into some of my other dishes. But I go straight for the Beyond sausages, which have a very, very good flavor. They got a Cajun-style one that I really, really like. And I'm doing Beyond sausage, peppers, and onions. I'm going Italian again. Again, you got to sear those Beyond sausages hard. The cool thing about Beyond sausages, they have a very thin casing. You got to mold them however you want. You can turn it into a burger patty if you want. I kind of like pressing them flat so you get a little more surface area, a little more searing on them. So I'm going hard sear on those Beyond sausages. I'm going to yank them out so I don't want them to overcook. And then I'm going to get in my julienne onions and bell peppers. Let those cook down nice and slow. A lot of seasoning on that. And then Beyond sausages go back in once the onions and peppers are caramelized. A little garlic on top, right? It's Italian after all. And yeah, we got that. And I think, you know, I just put it over some nicely dressed kind of alio de olio spaghetti, right? You got the chili flakes, the garlic, the olive oil, very simply dressed, lots of, you know, beautiful pecorino romano cheese. I put it on a big family style platter. So you got the big mound of pasta, you got the sausage, peppers, and onions on top, pecorino romano, maybe a little basil, herbs on top. Boom, I give you the whole thing. I say, hey, you got an hour. You can throw on a romantic comedy. I'll see you later, buddy. Enjoy, okay? That's what I'm giving the chairman. It'll be on sausage, peppers, and onions.
That's very nice, but we're serving one, and for the chairman, I will make him smash burgers. I'm taking those Beyond Meat patties out of I'm pushing them as thin as they can get between my mitts, and I'm dressing them with a whole bunch of Lowry seasoning salt and pepper. I'm slapping them into a white hot griddle until they really sizzle and that beet juice bubbles up and the coagulated oil liquefies, and I'm flipping it. You can hear it. You can see that nice hard crust, and I'm giving it a nice slice of. I think I'm gonna do American cheese for this. Keep it classic, letting that melt right on top of there beautifully. I'm assembling my nice, beautiful onion bun that I'm toasting just right. A little bit of mayo on that, some mustard and ketchup, pickles, caramelized onions, lettuce, tomato, and really making something that you can't even tell that it's a Beyond Burger. You'll be like, am I eating a real burger right now? That must be what I'm eating. That was my impression of Will. And you know,
accurate.
and this is I'm serving this to him with a nice bed of frites because I know he likes fries. You know,
Yeah, he's a
he
fry
just
guy.
said he liked the animal fries, and so that's what I'm giving him.
Very nice, very nice. Well, Chairman, what'll it be? The Beyond sausage, peppers, and onions, or the Beyond smash burger with frites?
Gotta go burger with free.
Burger with
Oh,
frites.
man.
Oh man, he's prejudiced against the Italians, huh? He's rejected both the meatballs, the sausage, peppers, and onions. My goodness, oh, what can you do? All right,
shrugging.
advantage, John. All right, 2-1. By one redemption is a tie. So let's see if I can get this last one. Chairman, please reveal to us the final meat alternative secret ingredient. Soy riso.
I'm going to dive right in with a meal that my brother and I have made at least 100 times. It is a soy riso, potato, and egg taco. It's a riff on the classic combo of chorizo and potato.
Okay.
Some soy riso, you'll find, actually does have a good amount of oiliness to it.
Yeah,
Some of it, though, it comes out a little bit more dry, but it really does pair beautifully with potatoes, particularly when you got I give a nice liberal coating of olive oil, and it kind of gives you the richness maybe that you would lose with soy riso in comparison to chorizo. And you're just, I think, Will, to me, I'm looking at him, I think he's maybe kind of a big flour tortilla guy. So I'm giving him a nice, beautiful flour tortilla that I'm toasting up nice, egg, some cheese, some cilantro. I've got some jalapenos in there as well. I've dressed it up with paprika and cumin and a little bit of granulated garlic just to give it that extra little funk that you want. And I'm plating this with some salsa, some diced onion in there, perhaps even a little bit of avocado, and I'm wrapping it all up beautifully, and I'm presenting it to the chairman.
Wow. Well, man, breakfast, they say, most important meal of the day, but not today. I'm making you nachos, buddy. Soy riso nachos. So I'm going to go big quantity again. I'm going to get out a sheet pan. I'm going to cover those with some beautiful, I'll go ahead and fry up some corn tortillas, make some homemade chips for you. And then, I could do like John did, a simple sear on the soy riso. Not quite good enough for an Iron Chef. So I think what I'll do is I'll make a quick chili with some soy riso hard seared and some Impossible Meat hard seared, and then I'll get some beans in there, and I'll get some beautiful spices, little tomato sauce. I'll let that cook down a bit, but not too much. I don't want to overcook my meat alternatives. And so you got that beautiful bed of chips. I'm going to dump some cheese all over those chips, scatter it all over, and then I'm going to dump that beautiful soy riso Impossible Meat chili right on top, and a little more cheese on top. I'm going to bake that in the oven. Then we'll take it out, dress it all on top, dollops of sour cream, slices of avocado, handfuls of raw onion and cilantro. And you know what? I gave you the melted cheese, and that's all well and good, but what's that over there in the little pan I got? It's a queso, and I'm dumping that on top as well. That's the unhealthiest healthy meal you'll ever have. All right, Chairman, what'll it be? Is it the soy riso potato taco or the soy riso chili nachos?
Gotta take those nachos.
The nachos.
Yeah, the nachos
Oh,
sound
fabulous. Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. And doggone it, you won't believe it, but once again on the Flynn Brothers podcast, we have ourselves a tie. However, I would say the audience wins this because if, you weren't a big meatless, meat alternative fan, you got some beautiful recipes. You're walking away with 8 beautiful recipes you can go home and make. Very simple. If a couple of lumps like us can do it, don't you think anyone can do it?
Absolutely. These are 8 dishes anybody can do. And I recommend if you're still a little bit nervous, and you're going out to eat, try one. Try a little something. Let a real professional chef take care of it. You don't feel too comfortable with your cooking? Branch out. We could all stand to eat a little less meat.
Absolutely. Please subscribe, comment, and leave a rating. Send questions, comments, or big idea suggestions to our business email, flynnbrospod@gmail.com. Thank you to our producer and Iron Chef Chairman, Will Slade, and we'll see you next time on the Flynn Brothers Podcast. Take care, buddy.
Buddy, you take care.